I wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for showing up for my talk this morning. We're going to be talking about VoIP reliability and security for a specific case study client of ours that we've had up and running for just about 2 years now. Just a real brief overview of the presentation. I'm going to have to move a little bit faster through things. As I go through, if you have questions, please feel free to throw your hand up, interrupt, whatever. If it's a lengthy question, we can take it offline at the end. But I want to try to give everybody an overview of what we've done for this particular client and for some other clients and how you might be able to apply it. So we're going to look at some common business communication struggles, definitely the lessons that we learned as we went through this process. And this is kind of a mid-dive talk. We only have 35 minutes now, 25. So we're not going to be able to get real deep into the technology, but I wanted to introduce it to everybody. So we're going to look at how did we address availability, reliability, and security in our particular solution, and specifically what were the software, the hardware solutions, and what ITSPs do we rely on. I'm also looking for ideas from you guys, because you guys know things that I don't know as well. So if you know better ways to do this, at the end, I'd love to talk to you. Just a real brief introduction on myself and the company I work for so you can kind of understand how our glasses are tinted on the world. My passion and niche is really in being a technology translator. So I work with a lot of CIOs and presidents of companies and tech guys as well, because typically tech guys and business leaders have a hard time communicating with each other. So I help people to understand what's out in the market and how do they apply it to their business to actually reach their aspirations. I've been an Asterisk believer since 2005, and I say believer because this stuff actually really, really works very, very well. And I do want to give a shout out to our partner in this particular project, Ian Teal. They weren't able to be here today, but they were very instrumental in this solution I'm about to talk about. So why do I say that I'm an Asterisk believer? I started out working for a social services organization, and they have a very large Avaya installation. And if anybody knows anything about Avaya, they are very expensive. Avaya recently, I think it was 4 years ago, for the same company, Avaya and Cisco did a bid. Cisco came in $150,000 under Avaya's bid. So that tells you how big the project was. And as I started looking at the Avaya solution that we were building to support 5,200 people in 3 states, I started seeing a lot of free and open source software under Avaya solutions. So they're running Red Hat Enterprise Linux, they run Apache Web Server, they're using SIP, all these things that the community has built, Avaya has taken and rolled into their project and made it a very profitable business. Just as a full disclosure, we do represent Digium and Polycom and Zoricom. The caveat is we used them before we started making money off of them. So we used to be a flat fee consulting agency. We didn't deal any products. So these are actually products that I believe in that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So the client that we did this for, just a little bit of background. They are a lodging business. They specialize in serving the military and corporate community. So people who can't sign a long-term lease on an apartment, this company buys the lease for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then they do smaller subleases of a couple months to military as they have deployments. And they were a startup in 2009. The CEO of that company and I have gone back quite a few years, and we've worked through a number of different ventures that he's had. And so at the beginning of 2009, they had 4 staff in 2 states, so Pennsylvania and Arlington, Virginia. And today they have around 21 staff in 6 locations. At the end of last year, they were about a $15 million company. They already had a remote co-location facility, and we kind of built on top of that, and I'll address that in a minute. So some of the problems that we've seen in the Asterisk community and in the VoIP community at large, we probably all recognize these problems. The first is SIP and NAT traversal. if you don't understand the SIP protocol and RTP and how those streams work, it's going to be very hard for you to make your calls work. We all want quality phone conversations, and in order to have that in the past, we had to have very expensive data and voice lines, and that's starting to change with commodity internet that is really reliable in a lot of cases, and that's actually what we used in this solution. This is all commodity internet, and I'll explain how we did that. And then security, and how do we address security? From our perspective as a company that's mainly, our business is mainly in the defense space, we look at things as least privilege. So if we don't trust you, we're not even going to entertain talking to you. So of course that breaks the peer-to-peer nature of SIP and how SIP is kind of envisioned as a protocol, but that's what keeps us secure. So we build on least privilege and encryption. We try to encapsulate things as much as possible. Of course, then you can have firewalls and fail to ban and all these technologies built into the solutions. So my philosophy in consulting has always been, let's use free and open source software where it makes sense. So we have a lot of Microsoft Windows and proprietary solutions out there. Let's use it where it's ready for prime time. A lot of free and open source people are, I would say, zealots in this respect, and so sometimes we've kind of earned a bad reputation for good reasons because the solutions don't quite work the way that they really should in business. Encryption is always important and is a must, as is least privilege, and we always need to have a failover and backups, and there are definitely differences between failover and backups. When we were looking at requirements for this particular client, we knew that we needed a quality colo facility, or ideally multiple facilities, and that's going to be up to your client to decide what is their risk aversion and how long can they handle downtime if there's something wrong with the colo facility. We happen to be very blessed in our area. There's a colo facility near us that I've been working with for 7 years. Very, very reliable facility, really great guys. If I have a problem, I can call up Scott or I can call up Mark or Luke or Norm, the two owners of the company, and it's solved. As far as ITSPs that we've been able to rely on, Vitality, who's here at the show, has been very, very flexible for us, and that's who we use as our primary ITSP. This is a 100% VoIP solution. There's no analog, there's no PRI involved in this situation. And bandwidth.com is kind of our second choice, and this really depends on what kind of call patterns does the client have. Does it make sense to buy a service like bandwidth.com that has unlimited calling, but you have to buy a certain number of trunks at a certain price? Vitality, if you don't use it, you really don't pay hardly anything for the service every month. So it's really, really nice for businesses like this lodging business that go through peaks and valleys, and they're really high peaks and they're really low valleys being in the lodging industry. Vitality works really, really well for that. Call-centric used to be on our list, and for good reason or not, if anybody knows what's going on in that space. Again, as far as requirements for the security, we only allow the necessary traffic. If your VoIP provider can't tell you all of the subnets where they're going to originate traffic from, you probably shouldn't be dealing with that VoIP provider. In the same way with your own network, you should know where do you expect traffic from. So in our particular case, if we get SIP invites or RTP traffic from a certain source, if we don't recognize it, it's just don't. In this particular case, we decided to VPN tunnel everything. We already had the VPN up and running, and I'll talk a little bit about what the VPN solution is. So in our case, it was well worth the overhead, and now we have encryption guaranteed going across the internet. So any calls within the corporate infrastructure we know are secure calls that people can't listen in on. Of course, once you get outside of that, you go to the PSTN or you hand off to your ITSP. That all goes out the window as far as security goes. And definitely, my advice would be follow VoIP security best practices and stay involved in the community by coming to events like this, networking with people, understanding. Neer's giving a talk next door. Actually, I'm surprised this many people are here that they weren't there. Don't get up and leave. Stay involved in the mailing lists and the RSS feeds. The VoIP Users Conference was mentioned yesterday in the keynote. They have a Friday call every Friday at noon Eastern. They talk about new technologies. They talk about new threats and how do we mitigate those threats and how do we solve those problems. So jumping into the solution, how we designed this. The servers, we just used commodity Dell servers, R310s. Really nothing special about them. We put a RAID 10 array in them. They're cheap servers. We already work with Dells. They're easy to support. They have a great support portal. We happen to believe in the Polycom line. We've had very, very good success with Polycom VoIP phones. Soft phones, we use a mix of Bria or X-Lite or Zoiper, depending on what the requirements are. Last year, in Vitality's talk, there were actually some people asking about VPN, and we got on this subject, and some people were really interested in what Tapestry was using for VPN routers. We've built this solution on the Foxconn box. It's a mini ITX platform. All told, I think it ended up costing us about $120 to build that box. Really, really inexpensive. Very few moving parts. There is a CPU fan. We boot it off of USB, and it makes a great little unit. It's very small, so you can fit it on a shelf in an office somewhere, and you don't have to have a data closet in that office. We also happen to like the Supermicro 1U servers for this sort of thing. A little bit more expensive. And then, of course, the Digium analog phones work really well, but in this particular solution, we did 100% VoIP. The software, of course, we used Asterisk. Wouldn't be here talking about it if we didn't. Security-wise, again, we start with least privilege access, so we only allow traffic from those sources that we trust and that we know about. And then on top of that, we're using IP tables and fail to ban to try to protect ourselves from insider attacks or even something that would possibly originate at the provider level, which is a possibility. For the VPN, again, end-to-end encryption, we decided to go with OpenVPN. A very easy to control scenario. If somebody leaves the company or somebody loses their certificate, it's very easy to revoke that. Their access is gone. There have been situations in the past where maybe somebody's at a remote office and that person is not, maybe not, things aren't working out. It's easy to cut them off the network, and they don't have a phone connection. They don't have a VPN connection to the file server, so you have very good control. The VPN endpoints, the routers are actually running Viata or Viata Community Edition. Really, really flexible routing platform. They have both a free edition and a paid version. The paid version gets you a couple more features, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. And then for the availability and trying to make sure that we have an available and a reliable system, we decided to go with the KVM virtualization platform, and we're using that in conjunction with DRBD to mirror the config between the servers. So if our primary server has some sort of problem with the hardware, we can easily fail that server over. I mentioned a bit ago that we're a Zorcom dealer, and there are actually two guys from Zorcom sitting right in the middle of the room there. I got interested in Zorcom last year at Astricon because Zorcom has a solution that does all that work for you. It's prepackaged. It has DRBD. It can do the failover right out of the box. So we decided to partner with Zorcom and become a dealer for Zorcom because we didn't have to do that anymore, and we knew the solution worked. It's a really good solution. Again, OpenVPN, two-factor authentication, offers you routed and bridge modes depending on what your requirements are. There's built-in support in Viata for OpenVPN. As far as the clients on the laptops, so everybody in this organization has a laptop, and the disaster planning kind of has built into it that everybody has the VPN client on their laptop, and if something happens, like twice last year we had at the call center, one time it flooded, the roof was leaking, so they were out of there for 3 days. Another time a big storm came through and took the power out for 2 days. Everybody was able to go to their house, fire up their laptop, fire up the VPN, open up their VoIP client, and now they're back on the network. They can field calls from the call center as if they were sitting at their desk in the call center. One of the reasons that I really, really like Vyatta, and Teal actually introduced this platform to me, is because it's a very powerful, familiar CLI. If you've ever worked with a Cisco device or something along those lines, it has tab completion like Linux does. It has contextual hints and help. It's a tree structure. It's very easy to read, and I actually have an example of kind of a base config on the next screen. In our case, we were using USB storage to actually boot the boxes and run the boxes. And with USB, there's a concern after so many writes, you kill the USB stick. And UnionFS helps you deal with that, as well as creating a RAM disk in RAM to keep track of all those files that are constantly changing. So you're not making so many writes to your USB stick that you're killing it. Vyatta has that built into the system. One of the things that we do to make a quality phone connection is actually set aside and do QoS on the internal network. Of course, dealing with commodity internet, we can't do QoS beyond our boundary. We can only do it internally. So on our switches, we do QoS for VoIP as far as switching the packets. And then the firewall, Vyatta has built into it controls that you can say, set aside a certain portion of my bandwidth for my VoIP, and never let that bandwidth be overrun by the data. And if it needs to expand, it can dynamically expand. When the VoIP doesn't need that much, it contracts. So it allows you some really nice flexibility, and it also allows you to do WAN failover. So if you have cable internet and you have DSL in your area, cable internet is typically really fast, but it's not very good for voice because it's shared and your latency is going all over the place. You can run the cable in and use that for your web surfing and your email and all those things that eat up a lot of bandwidth. You can use the DSL primarily for the voice, and if one of those goes down, you can automatically fail everything over to the second one and have all those rules built into Vyatta. If I do fail over, what does my new bandwidth map need to look like? There is high availability functionality built into Vyatta by default. If you want the sync of your configs, you have to pay for the paid version. The same way with the web filtering, it's a subscription service. That being said, they license it by core in your router, and it's very low cost. They also offer virtualized editions of their product that you can run on a VM. Just a real simple Vyatta config that I pulled off the internet. You can kind of see the tree structure. So here we're setting up the DNS for the system. What NTP server do we want to use? What's our username and our password in plain text? It'll actually do an MD5 sum there. What do our interfaces look like? How are we going to route traffic through our firewall? What does our DHCP server look like? So once you get used to the tree structure, or if you're familiar with a system that's similar to this, it's very, very easy to learn this system. So this is kind of a topology overview of what this particular client's network looks like. VPN endpoints at each of the 6 offices that are spread over Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and Kansas City, Missouri. They all have those Vyatta endpoints at their offices, which tie them in over the internet. And again, we're using commodity internet for all of these connections back into the data center where our master and our slave call servers sit. So again, DRBD is keeping track of all the changes as they happen. So as voicemails are being recorded, as we change configs, all that's being mirrored over to the secondary. Is everybody familiar with KVM? Do I need to go into a discussion of this? KVM is just a virtualization platform that sits in the Linux kernel, allows you to run multiple virtual machines. So in our particular case, going back to our topology here, at the KVM level, we're actually running asterisk in one virtual machine and then an OpenVPN host in another virtual machine. DRBD, this is pretty complicated in just the interest of time. I'm not going to get real deep into this, but again, DRBD at the block level of your system allows changes to be synchronized between two systems. Really nice failover solution, and you can do that either automatically or you can do it manually, depending on what your requirements are. So what were some of the outcomes for this particular client of this solution? For one, we were able to standardize carriers. When we started looking at this project and trying to figure out what size system do we need to implement, they were all over the place. Some offices had Comcast Digital Voice, some had Verizon, some had CenturyLink. They had absolutely no idea what their call volume was, which is really important when you're in the lodging industry to understand how many calls are we getting in, how long do people have to wait on hold, who's answering those calls. One thing we did right off the bat, within 2 weeks of having the system in, they realized that they could cut 3 hours out of their day. So they were open, it used to be they were open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They went to 9 to 6. So they saved a ton of money because somebody was sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. The phones were not ringing during that time, but they had no idea of that. They would have to sift through the phone bill from their provider. Asterisk and Zorcom has even made much better reports than comes out of the box. You can see exactly for that time of day, what does your call volume look like, and being able to make intelligent business decisions. So that's a really big selling point when you're talking to stakeholders. Do they understand what their business looks like? The telephone is very, very important to a business. Do they even understand what activity is going on there? Your traditional carrier doesn't really want you to understand that because they don't want you to know how much money you're paying them, right? So to be able to get that level of information out of the system is very, very important. We can now fail over between servers, we can fail over between sites, and we can even fail over at the ITSP level. So if the call center has a flooding problem, which happened in the middle of the day, we were able to very easily route all those calls to Virginia for a couple hours until everybody got back to their house, got their system fired up, and they were back on the phone network. Vitality has some really nice failover controls built into their web interface. If your system is down, you can automatically, for a DID, forward it to the cell phone number, and that's what we use in this particular case. So if something is wrong with the system, they're still getting calls. And again, that really offers us the ability to go mobile whenever it's needed because of some disaster. Just in kind of wrapping this up, a few things to remember. Security, looking at things from a least privileged perspective, I think is very important. Making sure that you have the right tools in place as far as fail to ban. Do you have your default passwords changed? Do you have the default mailbox removed? Things like that. I'm a big fan of test everything before we throw it into production. Failover doesn't equal backup. RAID doesn't equal backup. Mirror does not equal backup. You need backups in addition to all this stuff. And it's very important, I think, to educate both yourself and the customer and listen to people that have already gone through this and also listen to the customer what their needs are. And a lot of this work has already been done. These weren't things that we created. This was already out in the community. People had already done the heavy lifting of figuring out how do you have VMs fail over from one server to another? How do you secure your VoIP server? Certainly, if you have not delved into Asterisk, the definitive guide, you have absolutely no excuse. It's completely free online at asteriskdocs.org. The authors are here, brilliant guys, know way more about this stuff than I do. So this path has already been blazed. Does anybody have any questions before I just wrap up?
I have one.
Sure.
You mentioned commodity internet.
Yes.
In the keynote, you guys were talking about, that last mile
Mm-hmm.
as to the reliability. In your case study, you talk about, CenturyLink, Comcast. How do you guys go about dealing with that last mile?
Okay, that's a good question. So the question is, how do we go about dealing with the last mile? And there's definitely been, I would say, something that we had to kind of inject into the business process for this particular business was some pre-planning on where would their offices even be located. So when we started working with this particular business, they were growing in such a fashion they would get awarded a contract and have to spool up 300 rooms somewhere, and they would go out, they'd look for office space, and they'd say, bam, there's the office. The problem is that office might only have dial-up. So something that we had to say was, let's step back. We need to know, once you guys narrow it down to like, what are your 2 or 3 options, let's do a survey, let's figure out what's in that area, let's go out and look at reviews that people are doing online and feedback. Let's look at the maps and figure out what service providers are in that area. And then, because it is commodity internet, even business class internet, you're not buying anything that's guaranteed, right? It's only, they guarantee you up to 20 megs or up to 1 meg upload. If you have a latency problem, guess what? They don't care. They don't guarantee it. So there is a level of risk that comes into that. What we've tried to do for our clients is talk to the carriers and the providers in that area and make sure if we bring them in, they better have a 30-day trial. That if their service is not living up to what we need, we can kill that service. And again, we need to have offices, and I live in rural America, so it's a little bit difficult sometimes to get to a place where you have multiple options, but it's ideal. If you can get into a place where you have multiple options, that's going to make it a lot easier. And there are cases where you're not going to be able to get commodity internet that is going to work for VoIP. You're just not. Even though we're in kind of a rural part of the country, we are blessed that we have pretty good carriers in our area. I was talking to Corey, another guy here that's really, really good with VoIP. He's from the Philly area. They have really good internet there as well. As I talk to guys around the country, this is definitely improving, and commodity internet is getting to the place where you can rely on it a lot more. And if you have a backup plan in place that you can use another provider, that's even better.
Have you looked at some of the other firewall options that are out there, like pfSense?
We have. Yeah, I looked at pfSense. I looked at just using IP tables on Linux. We try to find solutions that are kind of flexible but prepackaged, so we don't have to do all the work from scratch. And Vyatta offered us that. And they also offered a level of enterprise support if we needed it that we can't necessarily offer. We're a pretty small shop. Tapestry is only 40 employees. The business communication side that I head up is only 3. So we want products that we can offer an enterprise level of support to somebody if they need that. So that's why we chose Vyatta.
pfSense has grown a lot over the last few years, and I've started to use it almost exclusively. From an ease of use perspective, if you're not a Cisco type expert command
Right.
type person, that
Right.
which pfSense's UI and all that other stuff
Right.
makes the ease of management almost as easy as like with your DVX.
Yes.
The power's still there under the, you can still add config files if you want.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't looked at pfSense probably in a year or two, so I've probably missed some of that. Vyatta does have, with the paid version, you get a GUI. That being said, the GUI is very much like the command line, so if you don't understand the command line, you probably won't understand the GUI. Yes, one more question.
For your example here, they only have a single colo facility for their colo servers?
They do, yes. And that was a decision that they made based on their budget and based on what their tolerance for outage was at that colo facility. So our plan, if that colo facility goes offline, Vitality has been a reliable enough provider for us, and they provide a failover mechanism that everybody goes to cell phone. So that's our backup plan basically for that.
But there is the human interaction with that.
No, Vitality does it automatically. So if you program in a cell phone, if your system is not available, it will automatically forward the call to your cell phone. So let me just wrap up real quick. I gave an overview of the solution, the providers, the hardware, the software. I do want to thank Digium. Of course, they put all of the effort into putting this together, and for Tapestry for allowing me to sponsor me to come. Thank you guys for coming. Please remember to fill out the surveys for the talks as you go. Digium looks at those, and that's very important in making Astrocon better every year. And if you have any more questions, my contact info is there. Please feel free to give me a call. I hang out in the Astros IRC channel. You can ask me questions there. Find my website, shoot me an email, what have you. Here are all the resources about all the products that I talked about if you want to snap a picture. or the slides will be available online as well. So thank you all for coming.